Hello there, I'm Christian Gurling, the Tillamook Air Museum's curator, and today's guest is a bit of a living legend, Captain Lloyd Abel, call sign Bozo. Bozo was a United States naval aviator who was intimately involved in the making of the 1986 smash hit Top Gun. He's the film's aerial coordinator, a feat in and of itself, was the pilot who took several of the film's actors up in the air, including Anthony Edwards and Tom Cruise, just to name a couple. And most memorably, he was the daredevil pilot who buzzed the tower during the film. Imagine being able to put all that on your resume. Bozo, thank you for joining us today. It is wonderful to have you.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
Before we take a deep dive into Top Gun, I'd like for you to take us back to the beginning and where it all started for you. Where did you grow up at?
Yeah, well, I was, I don't want to go back too far. You get bored to death and they'll turn the radio off. But I was an Army brat. My father was in the Army in 1950. I was born in Fort Knox, Kentucky. And short dissertation wasn't too long after that before he got orders to Hokkaido, Japan, took my mother and myself with him. But that was really not a ruse, but it was to facilitate him going to the Korean War. And so while we were on a base in the Army in Japan, he spent a couple years in Korea, and then he took orders to the Panama Canal Zone. Those turned out to be back-to-back orders, and I didn't come back to the United States until I was 8 years old. So I left when I was about 8 months old and came back when I was about 8 years old. Father retired from the Army. We settled in Columbus, Georgia at Fort Benning, and I went through high school there. Went to Georgia Southern, then Columbus College, got into the Aviation Officer Candidate program, went through Pensacola. This was 71 when I went through AOCS, and wound up Rio in the back seat of an F4 out at Miramar, and did a couple of cruises on the Coral Sea with that. Always chasing to be a pilot. I had good eyesight, but a lot of things along the way trip you up, and the least of which is in the process of AOCS, they were trying to thin the ranks, and so they were basically cutting out a bunch of pilots. And so my request to transition during training there to the pilot side as opposed to the NFO side wasn't going to go very well. So I stuck with the NFO part, knowing full well that later on they did a lot of transitions of Rio's NFOs to pilots so that I could pick it up. But it essentially took from getting my wings in 72 all the way till 1979. That's when I went back through the pilot program. And in that process, did a couple cruises I mentioned on the Coral Sea with VF 111, went to VF 124, transitioned to the F-14, became a RAG instructor at the same time. I did that all the way up from 76 up to 78. Or so, and then went to VF 111 as a Rio in the F-14, and I did about a year there and a cruise, and that's when I got picked up for the retread program, we call it, pilot transition from being an NFO, and went back through Pensacola and Kingsville, got my wings, came back to Miramar, and wound up in VF 51, and did 46 months with them.
So your dad was an Army guy. Now, how did you? Obviously, you ended up joining the Navy, but had you always wanted to be a pilot from the time you were a child?
That's absolutely right, and that for any number of reasons. But I made models when I was a kid, and I got more serious about it as to the avenues that were available to me. As the time when I got to high school, I was Cub Scout, Boy Scout, and then when I was in high school, I was a sophomore in high school. This program opened up. I'm not sure how I found out about it, but Air Explorers was like the next stage after Boy Scouts for older use. And they were out at Lawson Army Aviation. They were going to open a Explorer post. And I signed up for it with another guy and went out there, and we did everything aviation oriented. And our mentors, our guys in there were Huey drivers, UH-1As and Ds, or they were Cobra drivers, or they were fixed wing de Havilland aircraft, L-19s, L-20s, even Caribous. They had Caribous and all the fixed wing aircraft they used for parachuting and doing stuff. So, and they had a club, and so we, by privilege of the Air Export, that's where we met and had our meetings and all that. And we did all kinds of stuff. We went up to Atlanta to Marietta to see, Lockheed's operation. And so we did things that were more sophisticated for use that were aviation oriented. So this is all feeding the fire. I was going to get to fly at some point. And they opened the flying club, these group of guys, if you will, these scout instructors. And I worked cleaning the place and helping the one mechanic they had, do things. And I didn't get paid a wage. What I got paid was I got a half hour of flight time. And so I started flying in a little Cessna 150 that they had at the club, and I got a couple of 3 hours in that. And then they bought gliders, and they used to go over to Fort Mitchell, which is on the Alabama side of the Chattahoochee River there. It was a long story about how I got there, but and I was all keen for that because my age would allow me. I was 15 at that point. I could get a glider's license at 15. You had to be 16 to get a pilot's license. So I went and got checked out in a glider. They had two Schweitzer gliders. These are little fabric-covered guys, but they had a dual seat and a single seat, and they were all. Alabama doesn't have a lot of thermals, not like Colorado, not like California, but they have minimum sinks. So we get pulled to 5,000 feet, release, and then you would sink at a couple hundred foot per minute. So you were airborne for 30 minutes or 35 minutes till you were back to the airfield you left from and land. So I did that and actually got a glider's license. So the first thing I learned how to fly, my first flying did was gliders. And then I continued my private pilot's license thing to about 25 or 30 hours. But then it was time to go to college. And so I didn't have that job. I didn't have the Explorers. I had to go and earn money for school. So that was the end of it. And that's as far as I got at that point. Until I found the Aviation Officer Candidate Program, got in that, and then went through flight training, as I previously mentioned about the Rio part. I will say, when I got out to Miramar as a Rio, the very first thing I did was, now that I had income and time, I went and got a private pilot's license. So I got that at Montgomery Field in San Diego there, from the Armed Forces Aero Flying Club at the time that was there. So
now, how did you come by the call sign of Bozo? Because it's obviously one of the more unusual call signs that one runs across.
Well, there are worse names like Booger, but well, the fast version of that is I stood up in the Red Room and told 26 of my favorite pilots and Rios that I thought Bozo sucked. I don't want that call sign, and so that didn't do anything but fan the flames that was going to be my call sign. And specifically, I haven't let that cat out of the bag very much. It's not unlike Animal House. You get your name from somebody else. If you're lucky, you're fat and they call you Slim, or you're skinny and they call you Fatso, or you come with a neat name already like Scooter or that kind of stuff. Some of them are plays on names. There's just a number of ways that it comes into being. Me specifically. Little Dickie Gray is a great kid. He went to the airplane side of NASA. Unfortunately, he had aircraft mishap and was killed. But he was big into naming the new guys, the nuggets that showed up in the squadron. And so my call sign actually when I got to the squadron was RW because I was ready, willing, and able. My last name's Abel, and so it was RW for the longest time. And then I did a dumb thing. And that's usually what you get named for. But frankly, the way it worked was that we went to Tyndall Air Force Base. We were going to fight the 106s, 1v1, 2v2, that kind of stuff. And it was chilly. The F4, we always had dual canopies, one for the Rio, one for the pilot. And you ran your own canopy. And we went down there to the takeoff, hold short position. And we always waited for the 106s to go by. They had more gas than we did, so we would let them take off first and then go down range and turn around. And then we would take off, and then that gave us more time in the ops area. And so we're down there, even though it was cold. I had my flight jacket on because it was cold, but you always had, the cool factor was to have the canopy open, which we did. And so as the two F-106s were going to take the duty, their tailpipes are going to sling through where we were positioned. And my pilot goes, close canopy, tailpipe exhaust. And so I reached down there and I hit the button to close it. And then, like a dummy, I put my arms back up on the seals because that's how you rode around. Canopy open with your arms up on the seal, looking, spiffy. And so, luckily, there's a safety system built into it. Canopy closes down rather rapidly to the last couple 4 inches, stops, and then slowly goes the rest of the way down and then slides forward to lock. Well, it came down there and stopped right on my arms. Like, oh, geez, So I start to pull my arms in, and then it did do the closing part, and it caught both of my flight jacket sleeves. And so, unfortunately, I couldn't talk or do anything. My mask was off my face, and the pilot says, "Okay, it's time to go." And I was back there yelling, "I can't go! I got my arm stuck in the canopy," blah blah blah, like that. So, so what's cute about the whole thing is, so he stops the whole process, told the wingman to hold up, something's wrong with RW or at the time, Bozo for sure. And then he says, "There's something wrong with you?" And I'm showing him my hands. He can see in the mirror something behind him. And he goes, "There's something you can't. Your hands are stuck." And I'm nodding my head, yeah. And he goes, "Your arms are stuck?" And I go, and I'm nodding my head right. And he goes, "Oh," and he goes, "We have to share this with everybody." So he calls back to the ready room and gets one of the enlisted kids to get a camera, come out there, take a picture of me, because the only way to get the canopy up is from the external, controls. So they come out and take my picture first, and then they canopy, and then we went out and we fought the Air Force, and we defeated them as we always do. But when I got back there, it was Bozo this and Bozo that. What a Bozo, got to learn stuff. So I guess I could call that cat out of the bag, but not pretty proud of that moment. But when you're new, paradigms and paradigms. But it's always something you survive. That was fine, but
sure. Do you recall?
For dumb things I did. But.
Well, yeah. Do you remember when you first started flying the F-14 and what that experience was like?
Well, again, I had like 800 or 900 hours in F4s, and the beauty of the Tomcat at the time, for me, 1976, there was things that it had gas. It had 4,000 more pounds to carry than the F4 did. It burned 1,800 pounds aside for fuel flow instead of 3,000. Man, we always slid gas in the F4, especially off the ship, without a doubt, because the cyclic ops, and you can probably explain to your audience what that is, but essentially, once you take off, you have to fly for a while till the second group takes off, and then you land, because the deck is only large enough to manage, one launch and then a recovery. They basically can't do both at the same time. Back then, anyway. They can now. Decks are huge. But so it was in the visibility. The visibility in the back of the F4 is pretty good, but it's fairly limited. And boy, in the Tomcat, it was just out there with everything else you could see forever. And so it had ventilated, air-conditioned seats blowing cold air on your behind. I mean, it had stuff in there that was in, and the radar. The stuff the pulse radars and stuff were all cleaned up. They were all latest state of the art, HOG-9 system. It was a starfighter at that time, and so enjoyed all that. So just the transition to it was great. And then, like I said, I transitioned to be an instructor at the same time, which is sort of a plowback operation. But I got, because of how much flying I was doing and watching all the new guys come through, I got good at it, and I got smarter at it, and watching all the people and all the mistakes, and made it all better all the way through. So I was very impressed with the Tomcat. The swing wing geometry was where it was supposed to be at the time. The F4 had one good turn, and then you were in a hole, and that had one good turn. That's about it. The Tomcat had a little more than that, but it wasn't the engine that they wanted to start with. It's the one they had. It did have some airspeed bleed problems, and you could work with that. Better than most, though, its pitch capability was tremendous. With those big stabs in the back, they were articulating, and so that made the airplane just that much better. It was It had spoilers augmented for the turn, which caused adverse yaw, which later on caused problems with spins at slow speeds and stuff like that, things you had to pay attention to. Like I said, they hadn't wrung that plane out completely. when I got to it, and so we found these things as we went along. But you could deal with any of them. But heads and shoulders, the Tomcat was everything you wanted fixed in the F4. They fixed it, and that's the way. And so you can look at the follow-on airplanes, 18s and F-22s, and you can see that learning curve just makes for a better and better machine. So, but the Tomcat was a starship to start with. So.
Sure. Now let's get to what everyone has been dying to hear. The movie Top Gun, a monster hit, arguably one of the best aviation films to ever grace the silver screen. How did you become involved with the production?
Okay, well, that's I mentioned I had orders out of the squadron in October, and so we came back from cruise, I think April or May of '85. So we were on the Carl Vinson in the Pacific, and we started seeing message traffic come through the squadron. Navy wide things that go on, F-14 things in particular. And one of the things that was showing up was that the Navy, was basically getting in bed is a colloquial term, not too popular anymore. But anyway, they were going to make a deal. The Navy was going to make a deal with Paramount because they wanted to make a movie about Top Gun. And their source for wanting to do the movie Top Gun was an article that the producer, Jerry Bruckheimer, had read. And he goes, gosh, this would be an unbelievable movie, talking about the Naval Fighter Weapons School at Miramar, which is a real entity unto itself, obviously, and a very prestigious and professional. It's a graduate school, even doctoral, if you want to go to that length of it, for pilots, past the training that they get to get their wings, past the training they get in the replacement air group, and past the training they get when they're on cruise and actual use of the airplane. So this is a high-end look at how to fly the airplane, and a better high-end look at the adversaries. You train like you fight like you train, so you need to learn these machines, and so that's what this school did. So they wanted to make a movie about it. A lot of message traffic. If I remember correctly, and I don't know the names anymore, but the chief of information officer in D.C., he was a 3-star. He basically went to Deputy CNO and said that this would be good for recruitment. It would be good for a lot of things. And so the Navy signed off on it. They had done a project. I'll go ahead and bring it up. You can research it if you want. But VF-84 had done a project earlier in Final Countdown where Kirk Douglas was moving. It was a very good movie, too, I felt. And but there were some extenuating circumstances with that, and I won't go over those here. But conflict of interest was one of the topics in this process. So we started hearing about the movie they're going to make at Miramar, and one of the things that was in there was this massive letter about how you can't take anything from the production people, and that this is going to be a very rigid deal. It's going to have times and money associated with how they contribute. So they were being very religious about, doing this with Paramount, but it was going to be done with no conflict of interest. And so I'm home from cruise, and we get down towards the June timeframe. We had a CO, Zollinger, a nice guy, and he had made arrangements, which was unusual. He had found money to take the squadron up the Red Flag. And you probably know about Red Flag, but it's an excellent, air-to-air exercise involving all aspects of aviation support and everything else. In the desert, you go up to Nellis. It's a really superior place to do this training, and it's as realistic as you can actually get stateside without having to fight the real people. And so the squadron departed for a 10-day or whatever it was stint up there at Nellis Air Force Base. And now I'm getting to the part of how I got into it. It is exactly, as the saying goes, the right place at the right time. I had orders out in October, so I don't get this. It's a good deal. Going up to Red Flag, in June, it's just an excellent deal. I don't get that because I'm leaving the squadron, so I wound up being the officer in charge back at Miramar. Got 3 airplanes and about 70, 75 enlisted kids, and I'm in charge of them, and we do maintenance and stuff like that while they're gone. And so the John Simkin, again, the confit liaison guy for the movie Top Gun, he calls up and says, "Hey, they're moving the flying film schedule up. They want to do the tower flyby today." I mean, that's how it starts. And I say, "Well, John, the squadron's not here. They're out in the desert, at Red Flag." And so John says, "Well, if you guys can't do it, I have to move on to another squadron." And my CO had made arrangements for us to provide the airplanes for this filming, because he really got into being in this movie Top Gun. He tried to do the whole thing, but he got arguments from the other COs. They wanted equal, showing in the movie. So we were going to provide the aircraft, and pilots from other squadrons would come in. We were all qualified in the same airplanes. They would come over, and that was the plan. And so I called up my skipper at Red Flag, and I said, "Skipper, they want to fly this thing this afternoon. I mean, it's 10:30 right now. At 4 o'clock, they want the airplane to go by the tower." And so he says, "Well, I'll get back to you. I'll get going on that." And so I think I'm done. And so I get another phone call, maybe half hour later. It's the skipper, and he says that all the assets for him are tied up with the Air Force. He can't withdraw from any of those things, and then fly down to to have an airplane filmed. That won't rub. And so he says, "You're going to have to do this, Bozo." And I realized as he was unfolding that little plan that I was going to get to be the guy that flew by the tower at Miramar, and I was so not supposed to be in the movie at all. And so I had a Rio at the time, Slicker. He was a great kid, and so I went and told him what we were going to do, and he was aghast that we were going. He had his letter in to get out of the Navy, go to work for Orion Aircraft Corporation, so he was leaving in October as well. So that's how come we were behind. All the other guys were all up and found doing this wonderful exercise with the Air Force. So we manned up an airplane, went out there and flew by the tower 4 times, and came back and landed. And the end of it goes like this. When I pulled up to the, I had a little 2-seat Mercedes at the time, typical California, consumed with the car stuff. And my wife actually watched that tower flyby, and she came back to the squadron and said it was really cool, blah, blah, blah. So Slicker gets in that little space behind the 2 front seats, and my wife gets in the passenger. I drive up to ops to see what they have to say and how did it go, how did it look on film. And when I drove up there, they were all clapping and, going, "Wow." And then I'm saying, "Yeah, this is why I joined the Navy right here," and that kind of stuff. But anyway, they got adamant about the fact that they wanted me. I tell you what, I can do this a little better. Up until then, they had shot a bunch of ground scenes, a bunch of generic stuff. It was when they were standing underneath the tower, and they had the cameras all set up, and that big old Tomcat comes thundering by at 80 feet off the ground, shaking, the leaves and the bushes and everything else, and the concussion of the air bow wave of the plane and all that kind of stuff, and made all that noise and shot by that tower. At that moment, they knew they had a hit. That's exactly the way they responded. And so they just were adamant that since I was the guy to perform that thing, I had to be the guy to coordinate the F-14. And I explained to them I had a skipper, and that wasn't going to be the case, that, he's going to run the show, and we have other pilots, everybody. But, they said, "No, we'll talk to the Admiral," which I thought was kind of funny. And but John Simpkin, myself, and Rat Willard, who said the Opswell Top Gun, the Admiral called 3 of us in and said, "You 3 guys are going to be the 3 amigos making this movie, and you better not harm a hair on anybody and keep the metal anywhere, or I will kill all 3 of you." And that was that kind of, right? And admirals don't usually mess around, so we took him at his word. So, and we did. We flew. I have to say, we filmed like we trained as opposed to fight, and everything was always thought out, briefed out. Maneuvers were done. You could not film a whole maneuver end to end. You had to do the entry or the exit, stuff like that. And so we labeled them all, and so we could change in the air from Alpha to Bravo or Bravo if we had a second tier of it. So we coordinated all that, and we did not get a hair out of place, and we did not bend any iron, so we did good.
For the flyby, now, were you given any instructions from the director or the producers on what exactly they wanted you to do?
I did, in fact, have to go find the director, Tony Scott. And at first I went over, they'd already parked a bunch of trailers down at Hangar 1. That's where the Naval Fire Weapons School was at Miramar at the time. And I went there first because I'd already seen and knew that that's where, the actors and everybody was at. So I went there, and actually the first guy I bumped into was Val Kilmer. And he was actually doing the Hollywood thing. He was sitting in a lawn chair with one of those little, reflective things you get suntan on your face holding it. And I'm going, yeah, Hollywood is just exactly like I thought it was, But anyway, it wasn't forthcoming. But Rich Rotovich was right next to him, good kid. And then so was Anthony Edwards. And they said, well, Tony Scott's up in the tower. He's talking to the guy that's going to be, dumping coffee on himself and doing that. So quick like a bunny, jumped in the car, drove over to base ops, went up the tower, and sure enough, go right up in there, and there's the guy that's going and to dump coffee on himself, the one that says negative Ghost Rider, the pattern is full. And so Tony Scott says to me, I just need you to go by the window. Well, there's more to it. He wanted me to go by supersonic. And I go, nah, we don't get to do that. I said, you'll bust all the glass in the window here in the tower, and it just, people, car alarms will go off, babies are going to cry, can't happen, And so I said, but I can swing, I can, manually drag the wings back, and I can go by at 300, and it'll look fast, and that's all you really need, right? And so he was keen to go with that, and so that's pretty much how I walked out and went down there, and I had a time to do it, manned up the jet, actually. More to the story, we had the jet that, and that's something I should point out. The prop people were amazing. These two guys, and I don't know their names anymore at all. Just fantastic two guys. But they came out to the airplane I was going to fly. In about an hour's time, they had painted those logos up on the tail, and such that it would be the numbers they wanted to fly. 104 and 114, and I was pretty impressed how fast they did that. And so I asked the guy, I said, well, won't that paint streak? Because I had some experience with painting airplanes, and paint, if you get it, it's not dry yet and you go fast, it heats up and peels off and things happen. But he says, no, it's fast drying paint, I'm saying. And I go, well, I'll help that process once I get airborne. But so I took that airplane out there, and for the rare time, the wind was out of the east at Miramar, which is unusual. Usually it's from the ocean out of the west. So I started to take off into the wind going east, and I had a compressor stall on the roll at a very low speed, like 80, 90 knots, nothing much. So I had to pull it to idle, and the temp stayed up such that I was not going to be able to use that airplane. Somebody had to look at it. That would take a long time, and that we'd be well past the 4 o'clock part. So I taxied back to the squadron. And of course, we had another airplane there, and so that's the Navy way. I had a mission; I was going to do it. I told the chief I had a wonderful E9 there, and I said, "Let's fire up this airplane, and we'll be like 2 minutes late." And that's it. So I fired up the other airplane. It wasn't painted or nothing; it was just a regular airplane, but you can't really see that in the filming of it. So it worked out. And that plane obviously got airborne, and I flew by the tower the 4 times right at glass level, basically, and. A lot of interesting things went with the riding, doing the big 360 around the pattern there, north to south, going by the tower, the least of which is the Miramar's air traffic area is kind of a half circle. You basically, south of the field, it belongs to Claremont Mesa and Montgomery Airfield over there, their airspace. So I had to square the corner as soon as I passed the tower. And again, I had my wings back to look fast, which wasn't all that great for stall characteristics. So I had a lot of buffeting in the turn while I, got the wings back in the auto and get them forward to finish the turn. And then I'd be headed east, and I'd turn up actually over the cul-de-sac where I lived. I lived east of the airfield there. And I noticed every time I flew by my cul-de-sac, it was filling up full of people. That was kind of cute. But then I would get set up over Mira Mesa, which is on the north side of the Miramar Road there. And then come scooting north to south, right across the air station. And the first lesson I learned in that process was that the tower, I'm going to fly by at 80 feet, but there's some 150-foot tall eucalyptus trees on the golf course. So I found those, so I learned how to let down a little later than those trees to get down to the altitude. But and that's it. And then there was a big call from Simpkin, Bozo land now. We have to quit. And in the back of my mind, I'm going, well, I haven't done anything wrong. I mean, I've done everything they've asked me to do, so I wasn't feeling too bad. But it turns out, I believe John Stimkin had neglected to tell the press that they would be flying, this authority. And in and of itself, you wouldn't think you'd have to, because you think it would all be contained on the airfield, but you can't. The space you need to get the airplane turned around and get to the north position that goes south, you wind up flying over civilian neighborhoods, and at fairly low. I had to stay low. I couldn't go up to $5,000 and then come back down. It's just hard to do. So anyway, once enough phone calls came in, the admiral called up and said, knock that off. And so we knocked it off. But past that, it was excellent. The proof's in the pudding. Like I said, the thing to take away is when they saw that Tomcat come by that window, man, they knew they had a hit, and they were on their way. And then it's really true for everything past that. The more film that came in that we did off Clay Lacy on the Learjet or out at Fallon, the stuff was just, I mean, they shot foot after foot. It doesn't all wind up in the movie, but it had some great stuff. They did dailies. They would review the film they got from the day before, kind of in a bourgeois thing. They had they rented a bunch of rooms down Hotel Circle at Motel 6, I think. I'm not sure which it was, or maybe Travelodge. But anyway, and they had this big machine they could run what they'd filmed through there, and it was kind of a quiet hour there because the producers and the directors and the editors and stuff were all looking. And again, they're trying to go through, the things they think they need to make this film, and then X out the ones they think they got. And so, but anyway, the film I saw was just fantastic. It was all good stuff. So, and it was done, no computer-generated imagery. Everything you see is hard filmed off. It's on the camera bird, like I was talking about, the roll off the ship, or you didn't have the recorder, but it was off Clay Lacy's camera. It was the cameras, and up in the mountains. It was all like that. We didn't have any computer imagery at all. It was just hard filmed.
So I know you were also one of the aviators that actually took some of the actors up. One of the actors, of course, you took up was Tom Cruise. Do you recall your first impression of him?
Oh, sure, that's easy, and that's a great question. I tell you why is because in the world I was, the Cold War was on, and the world that I was in, it was pretty serious, and constantly training and being ready, and so you see movies and things are cool, but I didn't really know who Tom Cruise was as an actor. I had heard about Risky Business, that, and so I actually had to rent a video. My wife and I watched Risky Business so I could see who the young man was. And he was a young man. He was like 21 years old, maybe 22 at the time. And he had a killer smile, that's for sure. You could see what the buzz was with him. But he was very much, I called it, I said it many times in other interviews and stuff, I kind of call him the young Paul Newman. He was very proper, very smart, method actor. You could easily see that everything that he touched, he absorbed. He was, he wasn't a pilot at all at that time, but they'd already sent all the actors through survival training. So they'd done the Dilbert Dunker, had been out on a raft, and with all the parachute gear and how to disconnect the parachute and all that. They'd done a lot of that. And so when I got him, I took him over to the F-14 Sim, and I would familiarize them with all the switches, and I talked further about when you're under G, what that looks like, how do you turn around in the airplane when you're under G, what this gear, the G suits, what they do, how to talk, where the buttons were to key the mic to talk and all that. And so it was an extensive thing. I had a pretty full job all the way through, not just flying the actors, but getting them trained to the F-14 side of the house, and then working with Rat Willard about, the flight sequences and getting those things filmed. And then, of course, the makeup goes with it at the same time. And I had to account for all the time that we spent, filming these airplanes. Everything was worth something. If I had two E-4 kids tow an airplane down to Hangar 1 for a static display, and they were gone 4 hours, well, their time was worth something. The plane was worth something. And airborne, the Tomcat cost $7,800 an hour. So for every hour of flight time that I logged, Paramount owed the Navy $7,800, and they kept track of that. I kept track of that, and I would turn in single action forms was kind of a maintenance thing. I was a maintenance officer for a time. It seemed the easiest way to do it. But I would take all this time, add it all up with a calculator, and then go over to the comptroller at Miramar, Station Miramar, and they would send off, I think at the time, Cleveland was the finance center for the Navy in those days, and the Paramount had to they put up like, I don't know, like $5 million in escrow, and the Navy could just draw from that based on the tally from myself and like from Simkin and from Rat Willard and other people that kept track of the Navy's time. They could just pull from that account. They couldn't mechanically pay everything back. They could put money back in the 7F fund, which was the fuel fund, you know, because we were burning our gas, and they would pay us back. The Navy would allocate us more gas to burn since we burned it for the movie. But mostly what they did is they put it into good programs in the Navy relief programs and base improvements and stuff like that, because they couldn't turn it around entirely and pay everything back that was done. So. And that was, so my job was pretty full given all those different areas to push through it. And the actor, Tom Cruise, was just a squared away kid to begin with. He paid, as did all the actors. And so I did, in fact, take him up 3 times. You know, he got an orientation flight, then he had some, I'll probably quit talking here so you can ask some questions because it goes on, but we actually had a camera in the back seat the F-14, and you could change the lens, and I'm not a camera guy, but you know, basically the parallax, the depth of view you could change. And so when they film the pilot, he would have one depth of view, and they film the Rio, he'd have another, so to basically emulate the different cockpits, what it would look like. That whole process didn't go very far. Mostly there was a lot of air sickness involved, and two, they didn't have an audio capacity to record very well. They actually had the audio recording device in a ready room, and the actors had to step on a floor mic to say their lines, if you will, and it was transmitted through the air back to the ready room, and you know, it's scratchy and it's not, it doesn't sound like the cockpit, and that was remedied later on very, very cleverly, but but I did take Cruise up 3 times, and Anthony Edwards a couple of times, and Rich Rochovic, and basically all of them, or close to all of them. Didn't get them all, but Cruise was a great kid. And
I understand the first flight with Tom Cruise was rather memorable.
Yeah, well, you know, that's a talk show thing. You know, that's I've seen that story and I've seen the film. And the reality of it is, it isn't exactly like that. But there's no tale to tell here. Cruise, he wasn't a pilot, so he wouldn't own any air sense, and so you have to appreciate that. That particular thing he's talking about, puking in the bag. We had started a maneuver with the F-5, and it's being filmed by Clay Lacey, and so I can't stop what I'm doing tagged on that guy's wing like that. I have to complete the maneuver, and the maneuver really has like a scissors. The F-5 is turning hard underneath me, so I have to pull hard straight up, and then I'm going to roll the airplane upside down and pull back down on the F-5 while he squirts out to my side. That was the particular maneuver that we were doing, and of course Cruise at that point, he had gotten sick just short of starting that process. And so he was obviously reaching for his bag and all the stuff that goes with that. And so he was fairly incredulous when we knocked it off, the filming done. And he was back there, and I guess stuff was around in different places. And he was going, Bozo, didn't you see me back here? You know, I was hurting, you know, like that. And I go, well, I'm sorry, man. I'm locked into that thing, but I'm, you know. And I said, well, and I just wanted to make him feel better. I remember specifically. I said, well, they don't call me Bozo for nothing, so take that to the bank. So now that's the story he ran, and I've seen it many times out there like that, and it's never something to try to back on because, like I said, he's a consummate pilot now, and he wouldn't make that comment. He would understand what had happened, you know, because he's as good a pilot as any now. And so he would, that would not be something, that was from those what you see there was from much earlier in the process before he became a pilot. I'm pretty sure. So.
Yeah, no, he's Tom Cruise. He's that guy's a class act, and what he does is absolutely exceptional.
Yeah, you were asking. I mean, my impression of him. My impression is he's a method actor on everything. Like his first exposure to motorcycles was in the movie, and they actually had to teach him how to ride that motorcycle in that movie. Well, he got motorcycles after that and became a consummate motorcycle driver. You know, he just sucks into all that stuff and learns it. The aviation bug bit him then, and he wandered through and got his tickets, and like everybody else, and of course money allows you to do some stuff, and he's got that P-51, and he's invested and flies, you know, the Czech fighter trainer L-29, I guess, and so I mean, you know, he's, like I said, he's a consummate pilot. Everything he does full on, and I became a Tom Cruise fan back in the day, and I've watched it. He's made some movies. I don't. This is probably not the format to talk about, but frankly, I would have thought for Rain Man or Born on the 4th of July, which is some of his movies, he would have gotten an Academy Award. He was superior actor in those things. And then two, not even talking Mission Impossible, his sci-fi is awesome. If you like sci-fi, he's made some great stuff. And so, you just stand. And of course, if I will, the Top Gun Maverick, he did a superior job of that movie. You know, it's such a great tie-in. Goose's son. I mean, the plot's good. I mean, and now they got CGI. Although they flew the heck out of the F-18, and every F-18 guy now has a GoPro, so they were able to get all kinds of footage and do their Hollywood magic. And so you get to go along like you could never go along. You know, so it's a great sequence, and I would have never thought they could refilm another Top Gun because you just couldn't get the assets and stuff all put together very well, and it did take a while, 36 years or so.
Did you ever imagine, you know, at the time all this is happening, you're filming the movie, did you ever imagine that Top Gun would have turned out into the massive blockbuster that did?
Well, I can't, sure, I wouldn't know about it going to be a blockbuster, but I know the flying was, what we did was cool, and we were filming it. I was seeing that filming, so I knew it was good. I knew it was great stuff, wasn't out there, and it would be a hit, and like that. The thing is, like the Tower Flyby, you know, that's, you know, it's in every Navy aviator's wheelhouse. I mean, flying by the tower, not something you make the considerations you need, and you plan ahead of time, and you look for any parameters that might get away from you to be prepared. And so, you know, I was just fortunate to be the guy it got on film, and so I get to, you know, sit here and talk to you and say that. But it could have been, you know, there was 200 pilots at Miramar at the time. Any one of them could have done it, no sweat. I mean, I was pretty high time. I had a couple thousand hours in the Tomcat at the time, but still, it was in everybody's wheelhouse, you know. And there's some guys who get lost along the way. Ken Diebel, you know, he took Tom Cruise up for his orientation flight, and like Scott Altman, he was the guy up at Fallon that flew by, you know. Now, of course, Scott Altman went on to be a famous astronaut, so I don't guess he needs any Top Gun press, but it's that kind of thing. You know, my skill is shared with, you know, thousands of other aviators, and so I get to talk about it, but it's really them talking too. So I've always run it that way. It's never at the forefront of what I'm thinking about. It was cool to do it. I saw it at the time to answer your question, and I knew it'd be good. The blockbuster part, that's just the way life works out sometimes. So
when it was released, did you see it in the theater?
I did. I'd gone my new squadron. I had a little baby girl, and I saw it in April of '86, and my CO knew, he had friends at Miramar, he knew who I was. I had orders, and so the CO I had at that time in BT-86, he rented a theater to see it and all the Navy guys came. And so it was kind of like I mentioned earlier about driving up, you know, my car up to the tower. It was my second 15 minutes of being famous. So, and so it was cute. I was signing autographs and all kinds of goofy stuff that had meaningless things attached to it. But I'll tell you one thing that was kind of cute. The Navy, in their infinite wisdom, they gave me 1,000 pictures of the F-14. It wasn't even the squadron I flew at. It was another squadron. But and they gave me franked envelopes, already self-stamped envelopes, because they knew people were going to look at the credits and write to me, and I got letters, no kidding, that just said Bozo, U.S. Navy. And Navy knew where I lived. And so they would wind their way, and my wife got involved in this, and so it was just really neat. There were all kinds of enthusiast kids and girls, and they all wanted to know this and that, and they were always wanting patches and stuff. But I had a picture for the first 1,000. I could sign a picture with their name and send it to them, and then we did that. And of course, there was other things in there. I got proposals for marriage and lots of things. But anyway, that's the nature of business. So. And then just to close that out, then it just quit. After that that spring, it was a movie like any other movie, and then nothing happened. I did 20 years later, Paramount called me up and took me out to Hollywood, and they made a companion disc to the release of the 20-year release of the movie Top Gun. It's out there if you rent it or get it online. But there's a 5-section part, so I did one of the 5 sections, talking just like I'm talking to you on camera about the filming of the movie and how I did it and what my role was. So I've done exactly that. That was the 20-year thing. And then, of course, when the new movie came out, all of a sudden I got calls from all kinds of places, and so I did podcasts, and that's all done. So in other words, it was pretty dormant. I was just a regular airline pilot running around for the longest time, nothing going on. Top Gun was there because I'd get a co-pilot, and I'd fly in the dark from Detroit to L.A., and somebody told him I was the guy that, was doing the movie Top Gun. Then he'd finally come around the conversation. I never brought it up, but he'd say, they say you're the guy that flew by the tower. Remember? I go, yeah. And he goes, God, I loved that movie. When I was in junior high school, that's what made me get in, I'm thinking, well, thanks, kid. Junior high school, huh? So it kind of, I started getting older as I listened to these guys at their ages when they get motivated to get in. You said you were like 10 years old when you saw it, so the same kind of thing.
So what year did you leave the Navy?
I left the Navy in '86.
86, okay. And then you went commercially right after that?
That's correct. I got hired by Northwest Airlines, and went. It was actually into '85, but yeah, '86. I went, and I was with Northwest for 20 years, and then I became a check airman with those guys, and transitioned. Delta and Northwest merged, and I did another 8 years with Delta, and then retired when I turned 65.
Was flying commercial ever anticlimactic? Here you are flying these high performance military aircraft, and then you're flying commercial.
No, well, it's different flying, and you have a lot to learn. The machines are the machines. I'm one of those. There's a lot of people that have different opinions about flying, but big, small, little, slow and fast, flying's flying, and it's a hoot. There's nothing else to say about it. It's the greatest way I ever found to extend my adolescence, and you're certainly, when the autopilot's on and you're up at 38,000 feet going one way or the other, it's bus driving. There's articulation that goes along with it, the radios and stuff, and you're hired differently there. I mean, you're taking, you actually see the humanity of mom and pop and grandmas and kids and stuff, and so if nothing else, there's a powerful thing behind you to make sure that no switch is done incorrectly, that no procedure is missed, that no thing. And again, I was an instructor the last 8 years or so, and so I did check rides for guys, and so you're always looking. And I got to tell you, big time commercial aviation, Delta, American, United, all those guys, just some really solid people driving those airplanes. I mean, I just never saw a mistake. Then there's two of us too, and so procedurally, we're getting into the commercial side of things, but you'd be a pretty bold captain to think that you can just say, I'm going to do this, and if the co-pilot says, no, I don't think so, that you would go ahead and do it. So that process works gloriously. It's called resource management, and essentially a co-pilot can shut down something. I used to teach the other way. I said, when the co-pilot comes up with something, don't just give him a raised eyebrow. He's probably saying something because he sees something. So take it to heart and don't try to be too big a captain. So it's a two-way street. So it's very safe, the aviation. Getting back to your thing, I enjoyed all of it. I certainly like the people. I love, basically, I made the whole entire United States for the domestic side one big city, so I drive around in one city. And then co-pilot on a 10 for a bunch of years, flying to Europe. That was just a hoot. It was an excellent occupation. Again, extending my adolescence, paid a good living. I have a nice pension from it, so life is good. So I thank my lucky stars. I was very fortunate in any way you want to look at it, the least of which is been married 52 years now and have a beautiful daughter that whole time. So I am what you would call a lucky dog.
You are.
Straight up.
Are you aware of any instances where passengers learned who you were and what you had done on Top Gun?
I'd have to say probably no.
No.
That's as it should be, really.
Yeah.
And that would actually includes aircrew. It would always get around. I mean, guys followed me to the airlines, and they'd see me and they go, "Hey, Bozo," and so people knew of me and stuff like that. But again, it's not. Like I said, at Andy Warhol, 15 minutes being famous, it's pretty accurate. It was a mission that I did anyway, and it got filmed, and I contributed managerially to it quite a bit. And then the skill level was, like I said, shared with everybody else, but I got all that done. So, it goes in the bag and it's done. So, other than talking about it, and there's really not much more that passes by out there. It's interesting. I mean, that's why you're calling. That's why the podcast. I get all that. I went to a reunion for Top Gun fans last year, and that was fun. All these people, they're well into the stuff. I don't think they need serious therapy, but they need to get a little more life than the Top Gun thing. But I find myself not that wrapped up in it, but they certainly were. But it's just it was a thing that I did, and it was really enjoyable, and I've got lots to say about it if somebody has a question, but I don't really proffer it out there straight up as a rule. So
you retired from the Navy, and then you retired from the airlines. Do you still fly?
I do, actually. I belong to Armed Forces Aero Club here in Jacksonville, and I make a big joke. I tell people I made captain 3 times in my lifetime. I made it Navy, once at the airlines, and once on the tennis team here in my neighborhood. So, but yeah, I do. They have little Pipers, PA-28s. Again, it's just as much fun to fly. I go out and have a $200 hamburger at Cedar Key, which is, east of here, or west of here. See, I'm losing it already. West of here, kind of a fun, actually, it's kind of like a little carrier deck. It's a real short little airfield right on the coast, on the Gulf Coast, and you make sort of a carrier approach into it and stop and all that. So, but I don't fly as much. I wind up going out of fall. You have to have take-off 3 landings every 90 days. Occasionally, I'll miss that. Just don't get around to it. So my flying is pretty much over. Now I've got friends that still fly. They're just slightly younger than I am. And there's an airfield near here. They all have hangars and stuff. So I'm still in the EAA, External Aircraft Association.
Mm-hmm.
I still do that. Of course, I'm part of Association of Naval Aviators. And so I go to all the events, and I go flying with them some. So my hand's still in it, but that's I'm 72 now, so obviously I still own a motorcycle, so I've been riding motorcycles my whole life. So that's my day VFR fighter. I light that sucker up and drive the tennis, and it's all good.
Good for you. And I guess given your long list of accomplishments, especially for our younger listeners, do you have any words of wisdom or mottos you live by on how to be successful in one's career and be happy and healthy?
Well, that's a tall order, actually. I can say that because the dynamics of everything change so much, but essentially it doesn't have to be super in math, and those kind of things. The joke about being an astronaut, you got to be able to do math and physics and all that. It's a visceral, flying is a visceral thing. So if you can get to be a very good tennis player, you can get to be a pretty good pilot. And you always, I think, and you starve to death in civil aviation starting off. I mean, it's expensive to get your tickets, and the jobs in the civilian world don't pay as much as obviously the major air carriers or even the regionals do. And the venues that you could fly, they pay different rates and doing different things, and they're in different places, and some of them are ugly. But essentially, if you're a kid, make models like me, and you love aviation, there's the Civil Air Patrol. Kids get in there, you get air sense from that. Air Explorers is still around. You have to find them. Go hang out at the airport. I'm not. That's you can't go hang out at an international airport, but there's lots of little airports around that have fleet-based operators there, and you can go in, you can talk to the guy that's behind the desk, and they love proffering aviation. I used that word already twice today. Aviation, and so that they might even take you outside and show you an airplane. You might bump into a pilot there and say, "Hey, you want to go for a ride?" And, the plane like that. So that's the kind of stuff you do when you're a kid, and as you get into teenage years and stuff like that, you can find more serious programs. And then if there's a way for you to swing it, and I had a hard time, I could do one or the other, but perhaps a lot of kids have more opportunity financially. If you could get a license, then you can actually turn around and get an instructor license in the same airplane. Then you could actually teach as a civilian instructor, build your time, and this is all about building time. And then maybe you can move it from a single engine to a dual engine airplane, get a multi-engine rating, and then you'll find yourself very attractive. There's a lot of really low-level behind-the-scenes jobs out there. I mean, they fly medicine to all kinds of little airfields around. So, there's cargo carrying on a very low scale. These little towns, USA gets these little towns not necessarily by truck. Sometimes they're flown in little airplanes, no less. So I just know this from all the people I bumped in, their career origins. From the civilian side, I've seen that. Of course, there's the military, so if you keep your eye on that, it's very selective, because there's so many people chasing so few seats. So, but this is where good grades and a lot of things come into play. If you can make those things work for you, if you've got a military contact anyway in the family, that helps you slide into some of that. The academy is just awesome. If you could ever swing that kind of stuff, that's also a limited program, but and there's all kinds of flying. It's not just Navy. I mean, the Air Force has got a lot more pilots, a lot more opportunity. Army still does the same thing. The Coast Guard, there's stuff out there. Marines, there's ways to go. You get amazing iron. You get really exotic iron flying in the military, but there's a lot of family separation stuff. So if you're not that kind of guy or whatever, that might be the path. And then there's corporate aviation itself. There's any number of businesses that use little airplanes to go places and do stuff for the people, their business. You get to fly those things. The power companies, you fly these linemen, the firefighters, they get flown to certain places. So there's a whole lot of, I won't call it junk jobs, but there's a whole lot of aviation fun to be had that's out of the limelight, out of the, commercial air category. And that's what you do till you get enough time maybe to get on with the commercial outfit. And the thing about commercial airlines, they pay well. They got good representation. You can earn a decent living and get a good pension. You can, take care of your family. There's just lots you can do. So you just keep digging. Get a copy of Flying Magazine. Look at what's in there. Go to air shows. Go to air shows for sure, wherever you can find them. They're, Sun and Fun down here in Florida is pretty good. Oshkosh's obviously good. They're all over the place. I know Boeing out there does a couple air shows every year in Washington. And so that's all there. So that's what you want to do. You want to just want it. You want to just go after it. And it's not rewarding to start with. It's a lot of rote memorization, a lot of over and over things, the instrument flying and stuff like that. Not very glamorous. But you get better at it, and as you get better at it, it becomes more fun, and at some point it really clicks over, and everything's fun. So I'd have to say that's the truth.
Absolutely. Well, Bozo, it has been an absolute pleasure, and I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to talk with us.
All right, my pleasure. Have fun. Fly pretty, fly fast.